Evening. Welcome to Cornerstone Home Inspector Education Center. Tonight we have Principles of Air Conditioning. Stan Badurski will be giving the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in or use the chat room. Certificates will either go out later tonight or you'll get them by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you do not get a certificate, the first thing you should do is check your junk or spam folder. But if it's not there, just email me and I'll get it right back out to you. I'll hand it over to Stan.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about principles of air conditioning, as Jim said, and just a little background on this webinar. We have presented this in our first year, so it's 3 years ago, and we reapproved it. And when we were in the Connecticut State Organization, we used to put this in a newsletter every May, just as a refresher for the air conditioning season that was coming up. To give people an idea of how air conditioning or actually refrigeration actually works, and then some tips on how to inspect the units. So we're going to go through it again today, and for the veterans, this will be a review, and for newer guys, this will hopefully enlighten you a little bit beyond what you already know. So I've been a home inspector since 1989. I was trained and certified HVAC tech about 100 years ago. I did in-house refrigeration, heating, and air conditioning in a frozen product bakery for 5 years, residential installations for about a year before that, and was a building maintenance supervisor for a public building for 12 years when I started my home inspection business. So before all of that, I worked with licensed building contractor right out of high school. In my dealings with home inspectors over the years, I found that many were weak in the mechanical end of the process, not just the AC, but electrical and heating, but especially AC. So in this presentation, we're going to discuss the principles of refrigeration and air conditioning. They're the same process. The terms are interchangeable terms. Many things may have changed since I was in the HVAC trades, but the principle of refrigeration has not. When obtaining my continuing ed over the years, there have been HVAC techs presenting information to home inspectors. That's great because they are the guys that find and fix the problems, but they are not home inspectors. So quite often their information kind of contradicted what we were taught over the years regarding how to inspect an air conditioning system. This was likely because their approach was a find and fix mission, while ours is an observe and report mission. They are trained to dig in. We, of course, are trained to visually evaluate. So we, at least with the Connecticut standards to be approved in Connecticut, we have to go through them or tie them into the presentation. So air conditioning systems in Connecticut, the inspector shall inspect the installed central and through wall cooling equipment. The inspector shall describe the energy source and the cooling method by its distinguishing characteristics, and the inspector is not required to inspect electronic air filters or determine cooling supply adequacy or distribution balance. The mass standards: the inspector shall observe and report on the following cooling components: the cooling and air handling equipment, normal operating controls, cooling distribution systems, and the insulation on the exposed supply ductwork. The inspector shall identify the type of distribution system and shall, if possible, the inspector shall have the seller and or seller's representative operate the systems using normal operating controls, open readily accessible operable access panels provided by the manufacturer or installer for routine home owner maintenance, and report on conditions observed. Exclusions would be: they're not required to collect engineering data on the size of the cooling equipment, the size or length of distribution system, identify the type of insulation coverings, report on air filter condition or effectiveness, operate the cooling systems when weather conditions or other circumstances may cause equipment damage, or when the electrical supply to the unit is in the off position, inspect evaporator coils, report on the adequacy or uniformity of the place systems to cool the dwelling and or the various rooms within the dwelling. So a little bit more detailed than the one before that, the good old Connecticut. Rhode Island, the inspector evaluates permanently installed air conditioning systems by operating them with normal user controls when safe and appropriate to do so. The inspection includes identifying the system type and observing its basic operational response. Readily accessible components such as condenser, air handler, thermostat, and visible portions of the cooling distribution system are visually inspected. The inspection does not include evasive testing, refrigerant analysis, load calculations, efficiency testing, or inspection of accessible components. So basic themes are the same, just the words are different. Jersey, inspect all permanently installed air conditioning systems by operating them using normal controls when environmental conditions permit.
Rename, hide self.
The inspection includes identifying the system type and reporting whether the system appears to operate. The inspector visually examines accessible components, including the outdoor condenser, indoor air handler or coil when visible, thermostat, and associated controls. The inspection does not include determining refrigerant type or condition, testing internal components, measuring system performance, or evaluating cooling adequacy throughout the structure. And I believe last but not least, good old New York. Inspector evaluates permanently installed air conditioning systems by operating the equipment using normal operating controls where conditions allow. The inspection includes identifying the cooling system type and observing its response to controls. The inspector visually examines readily accessible components such as a condenser, air handler, thermostat, and visible portions of the system. The inspection does not include determining refrigerant charge, system efficiency, cooling capacity, or inspecting concealed or inaccessible components. So all pretty much the same approach. But I think bottom line is we need to make sure they work and not operate them when weather conditions are not favorable. The father of air conditioning, it's hard to imagine life without air conditioning, but when did this lifesaver first come into existence? The first air conditioner was invented in 1902 by Willis Carrier. Carrier was an engineer who was working from the Buffalo Forge Company for them. At the time, the company was trying to find a way to control the humidity in their printing factory. After several failed attempts, Carrier finally came up with a successful design that he called apparatus for treating air. The system used a fan to circulate air over coils filled with cold water, and it soon became popular in factories and office buildings. So I think sometimes if you know the history and you're talking to some of your clients, it makes you sound a little smart, a little bit more knowledgeable. 1758, the first recorded use of air conditioning was by Benjamin Franklin and John Hardy. They used a fan to circulate air over a wet sponge, which cooled the air. The first large-scale use of mechanical cooling was an ice-making factory in Cuba. In 1842, John Gorey, an American physician, designed and built air conditioning cooling apparatuses for treating yellow fever patients. His basic principle of compressing a gas, cooling it by sending it through radiating coils, and then expanding it to a lower temperature further is one of the most often used in refrigerators today. Giving up medical practice to engage in the time-consuming experimentation with ice making, he was granted the first U.S. patent mechanical refrigeration in 1851. He did not profit from his invention. Then in 1902, Mr. Carrier, and then air conditioning became more widely available in the 1920s when window units were introduced. These were followed by home central air conditioning units in 1950s. If you're watching this as a pre-recorded webinar, the first viewing code you need to record and send to us would be PAC2026. Send both codes and you'll get your certificate. So the tools of the trade for the tech. Techs are trained to diagnose. The two most important tools for an AC technician, and I'm afraid to say this because guys are going to run out and get these things now and try and figure out how to work them, but Gauge manifold, and the clamp-on ammeter. These tell the tale of what's going on inside the system, the high side and the low side pressures, and load according to amperage draw. So those things will change. You could have pressures could be out of whack and just completely compromise the operation of the system. So you really need to know what's going on inside. So general operating pressures, and this is going to vary with the different types of Freons. So we're going to go at R22 because some of it's still out there, but it's a good base to start with because that's what was predominantly air conditioning Freon. So for R22 at 85 degrees, the high side pressure, which would be the red gauge and the red hose, will be 250 psi, and the low side, the blue gauge, will be around 60. Those are the normal operating temperature pressures of a R22 air conditioning system. R410 operates in a range of 200 to 480 psi on the high side and 120 to 145 on the low side. So it will fluctuate a little bit based on the load. These ranges will be affected by the indoor and outdoor temperatures and all the things we are going to discuss during this presentation. So there's a whole lot of things to take into consideration before you can say the system's working properly. I would leave that word out because we're just not going to know. I mean, it may be working, but it could work better. But we'll get into all that. Principles of air conditioning. Understanding the refrigeration process is a must before you can determine how well a system is operating. So if water boils and turns into a vapor when heat is applied, and the vapor condenses back to a liquid when the heat is removed. To understand the refrigeration process in a nutshell, it extracts heat from one space and dispenses it to another. A review of the main components that comprise all air conditioning systems. So we have the evaporator. We have some type of metering device. We have the condensing coil. We have the compressor. We have the suction line, which draws the refrigerant from the A coil to the compressor. Compressor compresses it up to a hot gas through the discharge line, and then from the condenser to this metering device, it is what we call a liquid line. There's liquid, not gas. And then we meter this into the coil, and it's absorbing the heat. So all this absorbs the heat, takes it out of the air, and we get rid of the heat here in the condensing unit. The cooling or evaporator coil is located on the interior portion of a window unit, in the air handler of a central air unit, or in the plenum of a warm air furnace. This coil, when used in central air systems, is also referred to as the A coil because of its inverted V shape. Circulating fan moves air from the space to be conditioned across the evaporator coil and back into the space. In the central air unit, it is located in the air handler, and warm air furnace, it is located in the furnace plenum. The condensing unit is located outside and is comprised of the condensing coil. That's this guy right here. The condensing fan, which usually is mounted to the top, the cover. There'll be a cage in most instances, or some kind of, maybe not this flimsy, but something to protect the coils. And then the compressor, which is inside here. So when you're cleaning, you take all this off. This guy, you got to move out of the way, and you just blow all this down. And I clean my coil from the inside out. I go actually both ways. And all I need is a garden hose and a coil cleaner, and it should be done every year, for sure. or you're wasting some money. So the condensing unit, which is comprised of the condensing coil, condenser fan, and compressor. So there's a small diameter refrigerant line inside the condensing unit that connects the compressor with the condensing coil. That's this guy right here. All right, so it's going to the compressor and the condensing coil. This is the hot gas line. It carries high temperature, high pressure vapor, and is extremely hot to the touch. If you leave your finger on it, you're going to burn. There are two lines that run from the cooling coil inside the home to the condensing unit outside the home. We call that, typically refer to that as a line set. The smaller diameter uninsulated line is the liquid line. I know it's hard to see in this picture, but it is right here. It is not insulated. This line carries condensed low pressure liquid to the condensing coil. Oh, put that twice. It should be body temperature, so when you touch it, it really feels like nothing because it's about the same temperature as your body. The larger diameter refrigerant line is the suction line. It is cool to the touch when the system is operating properly. It should be insulated. It will sweat. If the stars align, your suction line should always be sweating. So the process, if you were to put a pot of water on a flame, water in its liquid form will absorb the heat from the flame. In the process, the water molecules expand. If enough heat is applied, eventually the molecules expand so much that the liquid turns into a vapor. For water, this happens at 212 degrees. So once we hit 212 degrees, we start boiling off that water. And if you do it long enough, that pot will be empty. Take that vapor and remove the heat or condense the vapor. The molecules tighten up and go back to a liquid state. So depending on where that pot is, if there's something much cooler over it, you'll start to see water vapor condense on your microwave or your cabinets, depending on the temperature difference. The refrigeration or cooling process, as we call it, for the rest of the presentation is based on the evaporation and condensation of refrigerants. So they're all going to boil off at different temperatures and condense at different temperatures to accomplish different jobs. Refrigerants are compounds that boil at temperatures much, much lower than 212 degrees Fahrenheit. R22, for instance, most commonly used in air conditioning systems for many years, boils off at minus 41.5 degrees. R12, which is in your refrigeration, has a relatively low boiling point of minus 21.64 Fahrenheit. When released from an upright canister in temperatures above 41.5 degrees, it will boil off immediately and turn into a vapor. So if you had a 30-pound canister of refrigerant and you had it with the valve up and you open it up, we're never going to be that cold. So it's just going to blow off as a vapor. The compound freezes at minus 256 degrees. For R410 chemical formula CH2F2CFHF2CF3, boiling point is minus 60 degrees, 0.84 degrees Fahrenheit. The refrigeration air conditioning system is comprised of components that will help boil and condense the refrigerant to remove heat from the air in a conditioned space and release it somewhere else. Liquid refrigerant is introduced into the cooling coil by a metering device. A capillary tube or thermostatic expansion valve are the most common. So the cap tube is in wall units and window units. It's just it cannot be adjusted. It's just one flow tube remains constant. It's a constant meter. The expansion valve is adjustable and is used mostly with refrigeration. The refrigerant is forced through a small orifice and sprayed into the coil. As the refrigerant enters the coil, it absorbs the heat from the room because it's in a gaseous state as the air being drawn across the coil and boils off. The refrigerant, now a low pressure gas packed with heat from the room, is drawn back to the compressor through the suction line, the larger diameter pipe that runs from inside the house to the outside condensing unit. The compressor is the motor located in the outdoor condensing unit. It uses pistons and valves to raise and lower pressure, or raise the low pressure gas to the high pressure gas. So it's kind of like a car motor. It's taking that low pressure gas, compressing it, turning it into a high pressure gas so that we can release the heat from it. The high pressure vapor is pumped through the hot gas line from the compressor to the condensing coil, which is part of the exterior condensing unit. Here in the condensing coil, the outside air, which is cooler than the high pressure, high temperature refrigerant gas, no matter how hot it is outside, is drawn across the coil by the condenser fan, removing the heat absorbed from the conditioned space, releasing it into the atmosphere, and condensing the hot gas to a liquid. If you put your hand over the condensing fan when the system is in operation, you should feel the warmer air. The liquid refrigerant is now pumped back to the cooling coil to complete the cycle and begin a new one. And those are fast cycles. That's just continuously going, continuously sucking the heat out of the air that you're in your house and blowing it outside and getting rid of it. So when you're looking at air conditioning systems, what are we going to look for? So for me, I do the outside first. So I first do a physical evaluation of the equipment. I inspect the condition of the condensing unit, noting units that are out of level, condensing coils that are dirty. Sometimes it's amazing how many dogs pee on condensing units. I don't know what the attraction is, but that acid in the urine will ruin the coils and the jackets. So we're looking for dirty coils. We've all seen them. Suction lines that are missing insulation, open electrical boxes, open or loose wire connections, etc. I check the visible ductwork for damage when I get inside, rust and air leaks. I inspect the plenum on a warm air furnace and the drip pan under an air handler for evidence of leakage or blockage in the condensate lines, among other things. Most of that is pretty obvious. So viewing code number 2, if you're watching this as a pre-recorded webinar, please record AC3827, send it to us to get your certificate. Condensing unit placement. So we talked about having to circulate air through the coil to remove the heat from the hot gas. So we need some space. So the typical distance that should be free space around the condensing coil is 3 to 4 feet. All right, that's any closer the system's still going to work, but it'll cut down some of the airflow. So sometimes you're too close to the house. Sometimes you got too much vegetation around. These 2 units, that's not 4 feet between those 2 units. The picture on the left, the whole back of this, there's no ventilation in the back of this. This is a solid piece of the jacket, so it can be put here. And what you'll find is a lot of them are going to be close to the house. So you want to look at that back because it would be pretty stupid to be out here in the middle of the grass. So even though the HVAC guys know, they're not going to stick it way out here. They're going to put in whatever in the location that looks the best based on what's out there in the house. A bit trickier is determining how well the system is operating. So I first check the temperature drop across the evaporator coil. Now, in commercial units, industrial units, there are usually ports right across the evaporator coil and across the filters. So the filters, you want to make them last as long as possible. So you take a pressure drop there. But on the coils, you take the temperature drop right at the coil. We don't do that in um, residential. We'll take it as we're doing our inspection. We'll take the TD inside the house, probably from the a supply air duct and the room or return duct. Doesn't have to be exact, but I was always taught that we are looking for a temperature difference of 15 to 20 degrees. That would be desirable. Today I Googled that to see what they say today. And they say, I mean, you'll find that plus 14 to 20 and 16 to 21. Tomato. We're all going to be in the same range there. Lower TDs can indicate older worn compressors, dirty coils, low refrigerant charges, among other things. Higher TDs can indicate dirty filters, improper coil size, poor air circulation, etc. Determining the cause of the improper temperature difference is best left to an expert. So you could take that TD. A lot of guys want to put specific information if in the report. If they're going to call for service, they want to have a reason why. Probably not a bad idea. But there are a lot of things that could be wrong that you don't want to go speculating on, even if you see some of them. It's best left to call for service. I say that, we've done a visual inspection. The system is running. It does not appear to run properly. Have it serviced prior to purchase to determine its exact condition, and any repairs that are necessary should be made at that time. I also examine the suction line to determine if it's sweating. Condensation should be present and will usually be an indication that the refrigerant charge is full and there is an adequate airflow. A frozen line spells trouble. That's on the next page. A dry line can, again, be caused by several conditions. This is always a sign that there's a need for service. There's a frozen suction line and compressor. Usually, that's poor airflow across the filters, so we're not taking any heat out, and it's just getting colder and colder and colder. Obviously, it needs to be shut down, thawed out, and serviced. Sometimes when they get frozen, you'll hear this, I don't know how to explain it, just like high-pitched vibration from the fan motor outside. So if you hear something that sounds out of the ordinary, look at that coil and that compressor.
You'll get ice on the outside of the condenser too, or the compressor.
What's that?
You'll get ice on the outside of the unit too, not just on that. But I've seen them where I've come in for an inspection and there'll be 2 inches of ice caked on it because the agent turned it on a couple of days prior. The house is unoccupied, no one's checking the unit, and it's low refrigerant, or like you said, a myriad of other problems, and that thing's just caked with ice. I've seen them caked with ice when the fan motor breaks and the unit's still running, so you're not, that'll happen. Sorry, I just was breaking in. The other two, go ahead.
These are things that you're going to see, and a lot of them are dead giveaways, but it's still a good idea. I mean, you could point out the things that you saw that are wrong, but still needs to be serviced, right? So that would be your end game there. Have somebody come in here and get this thing, straight.
I've been seeing a lot of on new construction, they placing them right against the house. I mean, there's just no way, there's just no room. On some of the stuff in the 80s, early 90s, you see them a lot by dryer vents. So all the lint and everything's getting right into the unit too. So we call that out.
There's the good, the bad, and the ugly in every profession.
Yeah.
And I have to say this. I think the HVAC profession, they're some of the biggest hacks I've ever seen in my life. They just come in and get their job done. They don't. I know one guy who doesn't even read the manuals from manufacturer to manufacturer. He installs them all the same.
Right.
So, I don't know how deep you want to go. Nobody can possibly know how every manufacturer wants their units to be installed. You got to read the manual.
Yeah.
There's no way we're going to do that. We can't be the end all for every component of the house. So we got to figure out what we can do without getting too deep, without a license, not a home inspector license, but you put gauges on an AC unit, you have to be licensed, at least in the state of Connecticut.
Right.
So if a home inspector says, "Oh, I'm going to put some gauges on here," somebody can complain about that. He's going to get in trouble.
So now you have the background in your reports. Are you putting the tonnage, and if the unit's capable of cooling, you're not doing that at all?
I know a
So
lot of guys.
I see a lot of new inspectors with some new reports coming out, and they're able to take pictures with ChatGPT, and AI is figuring that math out for them pretty fast. And then AI is telling them, "Oh, you have a 2-ton unit. The house should be anywhere from 1,100 to 1,300 square feet. That's what it can cool." And then you have a 1,400 square foot ranch, and they're calling it out.
So we did to follow up with sizing. I think we're going to talk about that right there. As a matter of fact, we did a ductwork and distribution webinar. If you want to follow up on this and you're a paying member, just go and look at that one. I think in the middle, it talks about all the things that can affect the heat load of a house. The square footage has a lot to do with it, but orientation, the area of windows, the amount of windows, what do you have running in that house? Are you putting more load in that house with other stuff? So to say that this is based on the square footage of the house, it should be this size, that doesn't work. That's a fallacy. The sizing of a system is a complicated process, as I just said, and is often miscalculated. It relies heavily upon window area, locations of windows, amount of insulation, orientation of the house, overhangs, tree lines, interior heat loads, etc. Of course, we are not required to determine the capacity of the system or its ability to cool a house efficiently or properly. However, you should keep the following in mind to have a better grasp of the refrigeration process. So we all know that the byproduct of air conditioning is dehumidification, right? Because we have to have a pan underneath the coil to catch the condensate and drain it away. So we are taking moisture out of the house. When a coil or system is undersized, it will remove moisture from the air, but will not have the capacity to cool the area. So a classic example of this would be a common dehumidifier. That is a mini air conditioning system so small that it cannot cool, but it will remove moisture from the air. That's all it is intended to do. But it's the same. There's a compressor in there. There's coils in there. It's the same basic piece of equipment, just undersized. So it'll dry the house out, but it's not really. Maybe if you stand right in front of it and put your face in there, it might be a little cooler, but that's not what it's intended to do. So when a coil or system is oversized, it will cool a space quickly, very quickly, or short cycling actually is what happens, leaving the air humid. It doesn't have the time to take the moisture out of the house, out of the area. This is the theory behind coolers used for flower shops where cooler temperatures and high humidity are needed, meat lockers. So properly sized and functioning air conditioning systems should cycle on and off, right? They should meet the intended setting on the thermostat. They should shut off, and generally in 2 degrees, they should come back on and bring that temperature back up to the setting. Where am I? So in other words, under conditions that they are designed for, they should reach the set temperature and shut off and restart with the temperature when the temperature rises, just like the heating system. So when you're in a house and you're aware of what's going on around you, I typically, if I have to start the unit, I'm going to try and pay attention. Usually I'll do that. If it's really hot, I'll do that when I get there. So by the time I get inside, I'll be a little cooler. But I'm going to start it up. If it's running already, I'm going to pay attention when I get inside. And I'm going to try and keep a notice that is it continuously running or is it cycling? Now, on a cooler day, like 75, 80 degrees, if somebody has the air conditioning on, it really should be cycling. On hotter days, it may not. because it might be just a heat load that is in excess of what we usually have around here. So if I feel that the temperature is the type that this unit should be cycling, and that thing's running, and the space is not exceptionally cool, I'm going to question that. It could indicate an excessively high heat load, an older compressor, dirty coils, low refrigerant, undersized system. If it's an average summer day and the system is not cycling, it's not functioning properly. Keep in mind that high humidity can cause the system to expend more energy on moisture removal. So you really need to be aware of a lot of these things. But I think if we see an older unit, I call it out right away. And I tell them, have somebody come in and, this thing is definitely, there's no way a 20-year-old unit is running as efficiently as it did when it was brand new.
Are you putting in your reports if a unit uses the R22 to let them know that if the unit breaks, it'll be more expensive?
I'm also sorry. Well, to me, if it's got R22 in it, you might as well just plan on getting rid of the whole thing.
Right.
Because here's, I got this going on with my daughter's car right now. Refrigerant does not wear out. It leaks out, right? If you have a leak in the line set, you can fix it. In a couple places, you can fix it. If there's a leak in the coil, either coil, forget it. You're probably going to have to get a new unit. If you're at 20 years old, that's definitely a good possibility. You're not going to get Freon 22,
right,
or you're going to pay through the nose. So I think people need to know that. I'm also telling people with 410 that might have older units that the next unit, it won't be 410. You might be able to get 410 for a while, but the same thing with 22. So they're prepared.
Yeah. My understanding on 410 is we're good for probably around 20-25 years. But again, you're right, because they keep switching it. And
I won't know that.
Right. And who does know that, depending upon how much they use on the manufacturer.
All right. So Jim, for some reason I have two screens up now and I can't get them to operate. Hold on.
Try your
I got it.
it. You're good.
All right. I threw heat pumps in here because they're basically half an air conditioning system. Heat pump is a system that uses a small amount of energy to move heat from one location to another. Heat pumps are typically used to pull heat out of the air or ground to heat a home, but they can be reversed to cool a building. In a way, if you know how an air conditioning system works, then you already know a lot about the heat pump. This is because heat pumps and air conditioners operate in very similar fashion. So air source heat pump is what we typically see. These take heat from the air outside and pump them inside through refrigerant-filled coils, not too different from what's on the back of your refrigerator. The air source variety is pretty basic, and you will find two fans, two coils, a reversing valve, and a compressor inside to make it work. So the reversing valve is what changes it from heat to cool. Theoretically, I guess, or scientifically, there's heat in the air. What's absolute zero? I used to know that. 427 degrees, minus, negative. So there is heat in the outside air even when it's cold outside. All right, but we do know that once we hit that 32, 30 and lower, that the heat pump, at least the older ones, may not be that efficient. And most of them have some kind of electric heat bank that will come on. Some have to be turned on, some will come on automatically. You gotta look at the thermostat for that. So I think your inspection of this would be the same as far as the physical portions of this. All right, most of the older ones are using ductwork. The new ones today are mini splits. And I do not operate, obviously, air conditioning in the winter or the heat in the summer. And the only thing that would not work possibly would be the reversing valve. So if you operate a heating system in the winter, there's 99.9% chance it's going to work in the air conditioning mode in the summer, unless that heat valve doesn't work. I'm sorry, the reversing valve. But everything else should be a similar type of inspection. The key to allowing the air source heat pump to also cool is the reversing valve. The versatile part changes the flow of the refrigerant so that the system can operate in opposite direction. So instead of the pumping heat inside your home, the heat pump releases it just like your air conditioning system does. When the refrigerant is reversed, it absorbs heat on the indoor side of the unit and flows to the outside. It's here that the heat is released, just like air conditioning. And the other process is we're pulling heat from outside during the winter and bringing it inside. Kind of simple as far as theory is concerned. They're usually split systems with an outdoor and an indoor component installed through the wall. Depending on the type of system, it may be one or more indoor components to distribute heat. They're becoming a little more on the inside, the components. You know, people hated to see those evaporator coils on the walls. They just didn't like it. They don't really distribute the air like ductwork can, but they're great for retrofits where you can't get ductwork, or you're restricted in other ways for heat and air conditioning. So, and we've all experienced them if we stayed in a hotel. It's not a good idea to operate the air conditioning system in the winter months. I always recommend that my buyers ask for some type of assurance that the system will operate the next cooling system season. So that's, you know, I've had that kind of stuff. I had a friend who I played softball with, and he bought this house. We did the inspection in February, and I saw him beginning of softball season, and I asked him, I said, Mark, how's it going? Oh, we had a problem with the air conditioning system. I said, what kind of problem? Well, when it was time to use it, it didn't work. And I said, well, I told you that you needed to get some type of assurance that it was going to work, right? And he goes, yeah. Well, there's a very prominent realtor around here. And she said, oh, Stan says that all the time. They're just protecting their ass. This is only 15 years old. It should be fine. And it wasn't. That's why language, and we've discussed this in every component that we talk about here, language is very, very, very important, because there will be people who are going to try to jump every obstacle and blame you for something that you pointed out and wrote. And, you know, Scott's not here tonight, but Scott and I, we put things in reports 3 times. You know, you miss it once, that's one thing, but you didn't read the report because it's in there 3 times. So it's really, really critical with air conditioning to hammer home in the report that it was not operated due to however you want to. I'm sure everybody has some type of narrative for it, but it's really important to make sure that it all gets in there. So when I was first starting this, there was no software, and I didn't do the reports until my kids went to bed. So I'd be typing all this stuff, and it'd be like late at night. And sometimes you leave out some of that stuff. I don't need to put that in there. At least with the software now, it's built right in. You click on it, it goes right in. So it's hard to not easily put that in.
Dan, it's a fine line at an inspection when you're with the client in the winter, especially if the agent's not sort of performing as they should. You know, you can have a situation where the client's sitting there and you're saying, listen, it's 30 degrees outside. I'm not running the air conditioning. I did inspect the unit. There doesn't look like there's any visible damage. I got you the age of the unit. This is how long they usually last. But there's just no way to test this, and I'm not turning this thing on. So then the client will say, well, what do I do? Because I want to make sure it's working. And I usually, if the agent's a good agent, you could just refer to the agent and say, listen, how do you guys want to handle it? Because there's other things going on in the process that as a home inspector, you probably don't know about. And I'll give the agent a time to say, well, you know, listen, we can have an HVAC technician to come back. There are ways to test these things in the winter. They, you know, do a more comprehensive examination. We could put money in escrow, which the attorneys don't like to do, but it can be done to hold back some money in case there's a problem. And, you know, there's a little protection that way. But a lot of times, especially in this market, you're just seeing agents just keep their mouth shut and go, listen, the home inspector can't run it. You know what? You don't have 400 other choices in houses. So, you know, if it works, great. If it doesn't, just be prepared. I have a couple of times stepped in when the agent's sitting in their car or the agent just, is 6 months on the job and tell them, listen, speak to your attorney. You can hold money. That's a little, I don't normally do that because I think it's a little bit out of our scope. But at the end of the day, you're there to protect your client. And if the other person there that's there to protect your client's not doing that, I really feel that I do step in from time to time to do that.
Well, you and and I know Gary was shaking his head earlier before we started. I told you when you get to be in the business as long as me and get to be my age, I don't mind stepping in
Right.
anywhere anymore because I'm just so when I first started, you were almost able to negotiate every deal. Maybe not every money to cover everything, but you would get something, and then the people sold their house and everybody was happy. And then little by little, especially with air conditioning, they would do something. Like if it was winter, they would tell you that we'll ensure that it's going to run, blah blah blah. They would try to do something. You just hit the nail on the head. In this market, you're lucky you have an opportunity to buy this house right now.
Right.
That's what people are. So sometimes you're going to have to, most of the time, people are eating certain things just to get in the house because they've already missed out on 5. But you still got to write that stuff in a report, right? Because we
100%.
don't know what's going to happen later. So to me, I've noticed over the years that I'm writing as much to cover my butt as I am about the condition of the house.
Right. Right.
That's
And
just,
the other thing too on the R22, not to beat it to death, but I've gotten a number of phone calls where I put everything in the report. I've done my job. At the inspection, I'm explaining to them that because of the R22, you can't just put another refrigerant in there. So both the air handler and both the condenser have to be replaced. But it's both units that they're just not going to keep the air handler a lot of time. Right.
correct.
And that's, I'll get a call back and they'll say, listen, you did an inspection 3 years ago. It's R22. You said the outside unit just needed replaced, and they're telling me the inside unit has to be replaced. So be very, very document.
I have that in my narrative.
Yeah, that both units.
It's true.
And then, what's your feeling on placement of the air handlers in attics? So we see them in attics, we see them in basements. The attics get a lot more hotter. They have to work harder. Do you call that out if it's in an attic?
I tell them that it's probably not going to work as efficiently as possible because the attic is usually, hopefully, 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the outside air, right? So theoretically, it should be working but we've all been in the attics that are 130, 140 degrees, right? That thing is killing itself. I don't care how much insulation you got on the ductwork.
Right.
That's just not a good location. But where else are you going to put it?
And would you recommend placement of a thermostatically controlled fan and a gable vent just to bring down the temp?
If I didn't think it was hindering the operate, those units are, you could be sucking air out of that unit depending on where that fan is and how strong it is. So you got to be very careful.
Right.
But they're gonna, you look at, if there's no other place that it can go, then they're gonna have to deal with it.
Right.
But at least they know. I like people to know, even if they don't call me. It's not to stop them from calling me. I think they just need to know ahead of time. It's an older house. We're not insulated very well. This is not a good location, but there's no other choice. This is
right,
a retrofit.
So we have a couple of minutes left, but just a little FYI, and I run this a couple of times, and even in my own house, it happened. So when COVID hit, we had air conditioning in our house. It was from 2003. It craps out 4 or 5 months into COVID. So we call the HVAC, our guys. They come out to quote a unit. They have no standard air conditioning. All they have is heat pumps because everybody in the country was staying home, was too hot, and they bought air conditioning. So we paid a little bit more. We have the heat pumps put in, and sure as day is, long, I get a call from the wife. Something's wrong. The air conditioning's on. I'm like, what? I'm on the road. I'm like, what do you mean the air conditioning's on? She's like, the air conditioning on. I'm like, it's 45 degrees outside. The air conditioning's not on. We now have a heat pump where she was just used to the boiler. Now she didn't realize that my system now, or our system, at 40 degrees to from wherever we want the temperature to about 40, 42 degrees, the heat pump's going to kick on, and we're heating the house by forced hot air. Below 40, 35 degrees, whatever the temperature is, the boiler kicks on and the baseboards heat up. So just be aware when you're in a house that it's not always one system does one thing, one system does the other thing. As we all know that there's hydro air and all, a million different systems, but a lot of stuff's going on out there, and there was shortages during COVID, and I wanted to put standard air conditioning in, and they were like, we're going to be probably 6, 8 months out before we can get you a unit, but I've got 5 heat pumps sitting in my warehouse. If you want cool air, order the heat pump.
Well, you do have to be aware of what you're looking at. But I think if you start looking around, you see ductwork and baseboard, you need to be aware enough to question that, right? To figure it out or ask somebody something, right?
But
Because it's not something you're going to see a lot.
Right, but normally, Stan, when I go into a house and I see baseboard and ductwork, they're usually separate systems. That's the boiler going through.
And a retrofitted air conditioning system.
Right.
Right.
But usually it's not like a heat pump and a boiler. There's these little weird things happening out there that you just got to be aware of. That's all.
So I want to jump back to the sizing, that
Sure.
question that you brought up. A lot of times I will see that maybe somebody took a porch and turned it into living space. All right. So now you added extra living space. Or this could even be with heating too. They convert their basement and they add heat to it. If that system wasn't sized for that extra square footage, let's say it pre-existed, who knows how evenly you're gonna heat the house, right? Because you've added, it's gonna run longer to get to the temperature. So these are the kind of things that I kind of look out for, and I won't get into it in great detail, but I'll say, look, this looks like it was added on. If the air conditioning pre-existed, it might not have been sized for this extra space. So keep an eye on how you heat and cool. The next time around, you might need to get a larger system. But guys don't do heat load calculations anymore. They put in what's there. They just duplicate what's there. In a lot of older houses, they were oversized anyway, especially heat. So you can't determine the heat load without doing a heat load calculation. Today, we used to do them by hand with a calculator. Today, they're in a program. They're much easier to do. But these guys, they just come in and put whatever's in there, close enough, and take their money and run. So it's a slippery slope. That tonnage versus square footage, amperage, all that stuff. You got to know what you're talking about. I never went there, and here I am 38 years later. I didn't buy anybody an air conditioner.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's some of what, there's a lot of things I don't do that I see these new, and when I say new, probably the last 10 years, these guys are doing, and I'm making my money. I'm working a little less because I'm charging more. I don't do any of that. And nobody's crucifying me. So I learned really quick, this is not necessary. What I'm doing right now is not necessary. But that could be another webinar or discussion.
Absolutely. We can wrap a little bit early tonight. Does anybody have any questions?
I just got one thing. Does
Sure.
anybody know what one of the largest air conditioning projects done was?
The
Do not.
largest?
Yeah. Tell
One
us.
of the largest, yes. The Hoover Dam.
The dam
They had to
itself?
refrigerate and cool the concrete, otherwise it would take 100 years to set.
Oh,
No
yeah, that's
kidding.
right. I think I remember something about that.
That's an
Yeah,
interesting
so that was
story.
one of the largest air conditioning projects done.
You know, little things like that when you talk to your clients, it makes you look a little more into your job. And I always maintain the fact that 99% of the time I know a hell of a lot more than they do. So I don't want to say baffle them with BS, but, and I take a step back when I work for an electrician or a carpenter or whatever, because they know everything. And sometimes, you don't have to do the electrical panel. Oh, yeah, I do. I got to put something in a report about that. But I like to give people little tidbits once in a while to, just let them know I know something more than what we're doing here. So,
All right.
but that's air conditioning. That's the process. You guys got this far. I hope you learned something, or at least refreshed.
Yep. If anybody ever has any questions, just email us. Vinyl siding is May 19th. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Again, if you guys know anybody that wants to give a presentation on a subject, especially if you know any kind of manufacturers, reps, or anything like that, reach out to us. And we had our state water heaters. That was one of our members, Glenn, contacted them and put me in touch, and we got it worked out. And it was a very successful webinar. So yeah, we have a bunch of nice webinars coming up. We have vinyl siding on May 19th, GFCI outlets June 2nd, inspecting 100 to 300-year-old homes June 16th, chimney flashing July 7th, new home features July 21st, boilers August 4th, foundation cracks August 18th. So we got plenty of stuff coming out. We have the new newsletter is out and been published, so it's on our website. And remember that if you want a logo for this event, just go to the logo section of our website. The password is Cornerstone. So thank you everybody for showing up tonight. And like I said, we'll get the certificates right out to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate your attendance.
All right, see you guys.